You ever just look at a giant tree and wonder how it even works? It's amazing. And it turns out, for some of our biggest engineering challenges, nature has already handed us the blueprint. Today, we're going to look at how scientists are copying one of nature's most elegant designs to build something, well, something pretty extraordinary. I mean, seriously, think about this for a second. Picture a giant redwood soaring over 300 feet into the air. How on earth does it get hundreds of gallons of water, weighing literally thousands of pounds, all the way to its tippy-top leaves, every single day? It does this with zero moving parts, no engine, no noise. It just silently defies gravity. So, what's the secret? All right, to figure this out, we have to start with the biology. Let's break down the science behind what I'm calling nature's impossible pump. It's simpler and cooler than you might think. The engine that drives this whole thing is a process called transpiration. Basically, as water evaporates from these tiny little pores on the leaves, it creates this powerful suction. It's exactly like sipping liquid through a straw. Every single water molecule that leaves pulls the one right behind it up the chain. Okay, but for that suction to work over hundreds of feet, that chain of water can't break. And it doesn't, thanks to a force called cohesion. Water molecules are super sticky. They love to cling to each other. They form this continuous, unbroken liquid rope that gets pulled all the way from the roots to the top of the tree. It's incredible. So nature gives us this perfect blueprint, right? A solar-powered engine and a water-based rope. It's just a stunningly efficient biological machine. And that brings up two really big questions. One, can we build one ourselves? And maybe more importantly, why would we even need to? This is where we pivot from biology to technology. And here's why this matters so much. That number you're looking at, 40%, that's how much the UN projects global water demand is going to increase. In a lot of places around the world, clean water is already terrifyingly scarce, so we desperately need new ways to pump and purify water, ways that don't need a ton of energy. You know, ways that work more like a tree. And this is where bionics comes into play. It's the science of looking at nature to solve our own problems. The research we're diving into today comes from the bachelor thesis of a guy named David Hinzman, who basically set out to build and perfect an artificial tree to do just that. Now, the idea itself wasn't totally brand new. People had tried this before using porous clay globes, kind of like a man-made leaf. But trying to heat a big sphere evenly is, well, it's really inefficient. Hinzman's key innovation was to change the shape to a porous clay tube and then stick it inside a solar heat pipe. It's a fantastic example of how a simple change in geometry can focus energy and make everything work so much better. So here's how his setup works step by step. First, water gets drawn into that porous clay tube. That's our artificial plant stem, the xylem. Next, lamps, acting on our sun, heat the tube and water starts to evaporate from the tiny pores. Those are our stomata. Then that water vapor rises up, it cools down in a collection chamber, and finally condenses back into pure, distilled water. It is literally a tree, just rebuilt in a laboratory. But the big question is, does it really work? And how well? This is where things get really interesting. We're going to follow Hinzman's experiments, and it's a classic story of scientific trial and error as he tries to make his design better and better. Okay, so he starts with the basic setup we just saw. He's got the clay tube, the lamps for heat, and a condenser up top to catch the water. Now, the critical detail for this first test, the connection between the pump and the condenser is left open. It's not sealed. And the first results come in. On one hand, it's a success. The pump is actually working. It's pulling 25 milliliters per hour. But then you look at what was actually collected. Just a little over 6 milliliters. That means a whopping 75% of the water vapor just, poof, escaped into the air. So the concept is sound, but the system is leaking like a sieve. All right, so problem identified. The next step is just plain common sense, right? For test number 2, Hinzman seals the connection between the pump and the condenser. The goal is simple: capture all that vapor that was escaping. And would you look at that, the results are way better. The total amount pumped is a little less, sure, but the amount collected more than doubled. The water loss was cut by more than half. That is a huge improvement from such a simple fix. Okay, for the last optimization, Hinzman goes after the power source. He adds a simple aluminum reflector. The goal here is to focus more of the heat from the lamps directly onto the tube to really boost that evaporation, the engine of the whole pump. And this right here, this is the breakthrough moment. The pumping rate jumps up to almost 29 milliliters per hour, and they collect nearly 25 of it. The loss is now tiny, only about 13%. This is, by far, the best and most efficient design of the whole series. So the lab experiments were a clear success. The pump works, the design is optimized. But now it's time for the really big question. How does this little artificial tree actually stack up against the real thing? And the answer is kind of mind-blowing. When you compare the pumping rate per square meter of surface area, the bionic pump is actually more than 3 times as efficient as a living birch tree. I mean, think about that. In this one specific measurement, the artificial copy actually beats the original. But before we all start planning our bionic forests, Hinzman himself brings us back down to earth with a healthy dose of reality. He's very clear in his paper that major challenges are still there. The system can overheat, the total output of water is still really low, and the materials themselves wear down over time, especially if you're using salt water. And here it is. This is probably the most sobering number of all. When Hinzman ran the numbers for using just average sunlight, not those powerful lab lamps, a single pump would produce just over 1 milliliter of water an hour. We're talking about a few drops. This is a brilliant proof of concept, but it's not a city-scale solution. At least, not yet. So the path forward from here is pretty clear. The journey from this single lab pump to something that could work in the real world means tackling some big engineering hurdles. You've got to make the system more durable, make it smarter so it doesn't overheat, and most importantly, figure out how to scale it up from one tiny pump to huge arrays of them. And that leaves us with this one last fascinating thought. Hinzman's work proved the principle is sound. We can build an artificial tree. And yeah, right now a single pump is just a drop in the bucket, but it really makes you wonder, if we keep innovating, if we figure out how to scale it, could an entire forest of these things one day help quench our planet's growing thirst?